Greetings, I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this Type 95 Chiha. This is a 28mm scale plastic tank by Warlord Games, and by the absence of their logo you can tell that this kit wasn't made by Italeri. I'll leave it to you to decide if that's a good or a bad thing. Personally, I feel indifferent. This is going to be my first Japanese tank, which I'm excited about. I don't actually have any plans for a Japanese army though. Not yet, though there are some plastic infantry available, so tempting. Anyway, the back of the box has some information about the Chiha, 4 nice images of the tank including the Shinhoto version, probably saying that wrong, which has a bigger turret. You can also see the stat cards, decal sheet and damage markers. And it also points out that a detailed Japanese tank commander is included. Inside the box you'll find 2 sprues containing all the parts we need to make a Chiha. Unfortunately, not enough parts to make both versions of the tank, so you'll have to choose one. The parts themselves are what I would expect from Warlord. They're well detailed and neatly moulded, and I wasn't able to find any defects. And the mould lines aren't too bad at all. There's a lot of nice bolt and rivet detail on these parts that should make the kit fun and interesting to paint, and it looks to me like these parts should go together very nicely and easily. I do have one minor complaint about these sprues. The parts are not labelled, not on the sprue itself anyway. The instructions do have sprue diagrams with markings on them, so it's not like you can't figure out which part is which. It would just be nice to have the numbers on the sprue too. Otherwise, these are very nice sprues. How many more times can I say sprue? In case you've not seen them before, here are the damage markers. And here's the decals. These are obviously for the most part indecipherable to me because I don't speak or read Japanese, but they look decent enough and there is some variety there. We also get a stat card for both types of Chiha this kit can build. The second card tells us that Shinhoto means new turret, which is nice. And of course there's an instruction booklet which is well laid out, easy to follow, and includes the labelled sprue diagrams, and all the instructions you'll need to build the model. There's also a basic painting guide at the back. The first step to building this is to assemble the tracks. There's not much to this, only 5 parts. First, I glue the halves of the drive sprocket together. This has a D-shaped keying that makes sure it goes together correctly. There is a little bit of play in this, but it's not too bad, and shouldn't have any adverse effects. I glue this onto the hull side part, which also has a D-shaped keying. If the drive sprocket has the edges of the track links facing in towards the road wheels, you've got the parts on backwards, I'm sorry to say. Next come the tracks. As you can see, the end of these is a bit skinny because the edges of the tracks are moulded into the drive sprocket. This part is easy to attach, as is the lower section. I apply pressure and the tracks are done. I wouldn't call them perfect. The ends where they join do look a tiny bit odd and there's a slight gap around the idler wheel, but they do look decent enough and were super easy to put together. Then, it's hull time. My upper hull part had a weird burn or something here. No idea what that is or if it's something to worry about, but I'm sure it's fine anyway. The hull is very easy to join together. The lower part slots into the upper part like so. I'm pretty sure you would have to make a significant effort to put this on wrong. I then add the lower front plate. It's not keyed as such, but it will fit neatly between the 2 protrusions of the upper hull. The rear plate goes on in much the same way, except the protrusions that guide it are a bit bigger and the fit is a little bit tight, but nothing a small amount of pressure won't fix. Then we can attach the tracks to the hull. There aren't any guide pins or slots or anything like that, but the sort of wavy ridge thing at the top of the hull will match the track parts and help you get the positioning right. Just slide the part all the way back and up. Simple. The result is pretty decent. Now we must make a choice. Do you want to build the early Chiha or the Shinhoto version? The hull is different, though you can build the Shinhoto version with the early hull if you want to. I've decided to build the earlier version with the small turret because I think that looks a little bit more interesting. I choose the appropriate hull part and glue it into place. It's very easy to get this into place owing to the 2 guide pins, and the very obvious holes for them. The fit is a little bit tight, but it's not too bad. The instructions say to build the turret before putting the upper hull part on. The reason for this is there's a sort of pin to lock the turret in place in the upper hull part, but because I'm a rebel, I'm going to continue working on the hull. I don't want the turret to be locked into place anyway. If you're going to magnetise this model, you would obviously add the magnets before gluing that upper hull part down too. Moving on, I attach the upper hull front part. I did a bad job of filming this and the part doesn't seem to have fit too well either. I think it should sit a little bit lower and have less of a gap. I guess I just didn't test fit adequately here. The part could be made to look better with some work, I think. I might fill it in later. Next, I add the machine gun. These have a kind of casing on them that isn't round, which nicely helps it fit into the hole the right way up. It seems these two bumps along the top of the gun should be there. Next, I add the hatches for the transmission. These are very simple and easy to attach. They're differently numbered parts, but they do look to be identical, so it might not be such an issue if you mix these parts up. After that, I add this pair of odd curved plate things. I guess they must be some sort of guard for the final drives. They're simple enough to attach. You can see there's a notch in the parts that the brackety bits of the hull can slot into, and they should go on with the bolt details towards the centre of the tank. These don't go all the way to the top or bottom, as you can see. It's odd, but that's how it should go together. Next, I glue the headlamp into the little hole here at the front of the hull. The part is small, so it's obviously a little bit fiddly, but it's not too bad. There is a little bit of a sinkhole in the front of the headlamp, which I'm sure will bug someone, but it's easy enough to fix later. Next, I add the armoured plates to the side of the fighting compartment. These are pretty easy to put into place. There's no keying, but you can use the front plate as a guide for the side one, and then the side plate as a guide for the rear one that angles in towards the engine deck. I try to position it so that if there's a gap, it's more towards the engine deck. It'll be harder to see there. These don't exactly go on super neatly, but the little gaps can always be filled. Or you could explain it as poor quality riveted armour, or something like that. Then I install the muffler and exhaust parts. There are some fairly obvious little round nubs on the sides of the engine bay that these are supposed to line up with, and the muffler is slightly curved on the bottom so that it matches up with the shape of the mudguard part. Very simple. Next, I make the stowage bin. This is an optional part, so you don't need to add it, but I think it looks cool, and it's got some rope that I think will add interest to the model when it's painted. This box is two parts that are very easy to put together, and once it's together, it can be glued onto the rear of the hull here. There's nothing to guide it, so you'll have to eyeball it, but it's not too hard. Then I add I guess it's a toolbox? There's no keying for this, so I just sort of roughly put it into place against the side of the engine deck and the shield bit in front of the exhaust pipes. Easy enough. I then add this plate thing over the top. This seems to be hinged. I don't know what this is for. Maybe it's to protect the vents on the sides of the engine deck from rain or Molotovs or something like that. Either way, it does add some interest. On the other side of the hull I add this jack. Again, there's no guide or keying here. I installed it here like so, though I would suggest putting it a bit further out towards the side of the tank. I then add this bar. There's no keying here either, but that's okay. It's easy enough to lay it in place and then add some glue. And like the other side, there's another hinged plate. The jack interfered with this, which I didn't really like, and because the glue hadn't set on the jack, I was able to move it so the plate would sit where I wanted it. It looks decent enough, though there is a little bit of a glue spillage on the plate. I believe the later version of this hull has all of this stuff enclosed, but I think it looks a bit more interesting exposed. You could probably put some jerry cans or something under those hinged plates if you wanted to. That would add some interest. Obviously I've not done that, but it is an idea. To finish the hull I add a pair of shackles. These were a little bit fiddly, but with enough nudging they go into place well enough. I tried to get them hanging as naturally as I could, the way gravity would want it. Now we can move on to the turret. I start by assembling the basic shape of the thing. This is pretty easy. There are two parts and they only really fit together one way, though I guess you could put the bottom part on upside down if for some reason you chose to. I'm not sure why you would, but you do you. Then I install the commander's cupola. I position this so the hatch will open out towards the sides. I have no idea if these cupolas rotated or anything like that, but the instructions show it positioned that way, so that's the way I did it. Then it's time to add the plating to the sides of the turret, starting at the front. This part is kind of keyed, and I think I got it into place more or less right. Then comes the right side plate, which has no keying. Though, like the hull side parts, you can use the front part to get it into place. This seems easy enough to do, but I'm not sure I got it quite right. But I move on to the rear, which is keyed and goes on well enough. Then there's one more plate to go onto the left of the turret, which again is not keyed. I'm not really satisfied with how this all goes together. It's pretty gappy, but I suppose it doesn't look that bad. And there's always putty. I think the other turret would probably go together a little bit neater, but oh well, I chose this one, so I'm sticking to it. Next, I add what I think might be the mounting point for a machine gun. This is obviously quite simple, it's just sticking a thing into a hole. We can all do that, right? Same with this, which I think is an antenna mount. I almost put it on backwards, but it should angle towards the rear of the turret like so. Then it's gun time. This turret has the shorter, I believe 57mm howitzer. The other turret has a longer 47mm anti-tank gun. This part is quite nice looking, though the barrel did have a flat end, so I had to drill it out. Obviously I've not filmed myself doing that. This gun glues into place easily in the obvious location at the front of the turret. There is a little bit of play there, so make sure that it's sitting nice and straight, at least on the horizontal. A little bit of elevation and depression would be fine. Then on the rear of the turret I install a machine gun. Much like with the Hull MG, this is easy. I think these machine guns look pretty interesting with their odd-shaped casings. Next I install the commander's hatch. This looks kind of weird, in an interesting way. This is very easy to install. Of course there is a commander figure that you could install if you so wish. You would have to model the hatch open for that though, and I've clearly made mine closed. It was kind of tempting to have it open though because of how unusual it looks. I wonder what the reasons for this design are. The final part is this, I think it's a radio antenna, or maybe a handrail, probably an antenna. Because I'm a dunce, I didn't realise that I wasn't recording until this was pretty much in place already, but you can imagine how it might look being put on. There isn't any keying or guides for this, and to be honest, that's a bit annoying. I'm pretty sure I didn't get it perfectly into the right place, but it looks right enough. The turret goes onto the hull, and now we've got one completed Chiha medium tank by Warlord Games. Because this is the first Japanese tank that I have ever built, I don't have another one to compare this with. I'm not sure if Warlord, or anyone else for that matter, makes a resin version of this tank, but I would wager this plastic kit would compare favourably. I rather like it. It does have a handful of gaps here and there, and I will admit to being a little bit disappointed that you can only make one turret, but it's always a bit disappointing when a company makes a kit that can build different variants of a tank but only include enough parts to build one of those variants. I mean, the two versions this kit can make have different hulls, but you can get away with using the earlier hull with the later turret, if you could build both turrets that is. There aren't enough cupolas or machine guns or hatch parts to build both. I do understand why they would prefer you to buy another kit to build a different variant. Warlord is a business and it's in their best interest to sell as many kits as possible, and that's fine. Though I do prefer it when you can make multiple variants of the same kit, and I'm sure most of you do too. Whining aside, I'm pretty happy with this kit. It was fun and easy to build. Quick too. After spending a billion hours on last week's modelling video, that was a refreshing change. The details on this kit are pretty nice. There's a lot of bolts and rivets and other stuff that will make painting interesting and fun, and I think it's going to paint up quite nicely, though I don't have any immediate plans to do that. I don't actually have any plans to build a Japanese army either. I've already got 4 armies in progress, though there are some nice Japanese plastic infantry figures that I'm kind of tempted to get. Maybe one day. Either way, I figured it would be nice to build something new and different, and a Japanese tank fit that bill pretty well. I don't know how well this tank works in games of bolt action. I understand that Japanese tanks weren't very effective against allied ones, but maybe they're useful in bolt action. This one is probably good for taking out infantry. Not that it matters if I'm not going to field a Japanese army. So to conclude, I think this is a good kit to build that results in a decent representation of a Chiha, which is a pretty interesting looking tank. I like it anyway. What do you think? Have you built this kit? Do you have a Japanese army? Let me know in the comments below, and if you haven't already, why not sub here on YouTube, follow me on social media, or watch me stream on Twitch. And if you really like what I do, please consider supporting over on Patreon or perhaps purchasing a shirt or mug from my merch store. Links to all of those things are in the description below. And as always, I shall return soon, so until then, be excellent to each other and thanks for watching. Farewell.